Hi everyone, it's Geoff Casavant from Emerald Animation Studios. Today I'm going to talk to you about using realistic camera work in iClone. One of the benefits of using an animation program as opposed to making a real-life world with an actual camera that a person carries around is that your camera is not bound by physical limitations. You can set your camera to do just about anything that could only be done in the real world with a lot of expensive equipment and a lot of carpentry and hard work. But having said that, sometimes you want the look of your film to look like it was shot with flesh and blood actors and a cameraman actually holding a camera, like a Steadicam. So I'm going to show you how to do that. There are ways, little tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way using keyframes, paths, dummies, the look at function, and toying with the depth of field function. So we're going to take a look at each of those things today. Now, having said that, I need to caution you that Reallusion is going to be coming out with iClone 6 by the end of the year. And that's going to have a whole lot of new functions. It's going to have an entirely new interface. So most of the things I'm going to show you today will be able to carry over, but it's not necessarily going to be in the same place on the screen, and you are going to have to poke around a bit. But having said that, I think why don't we just dive in and take a look and see what we can do. Alright, here we are in iClone. I've called up a basic scene with just one stock character. This is Cain the Warrior. Now, I'm going to show you the problem that I stumbled across that first started me thinking about how I can get my camera to move in a more realistic fashion. If you are like me, when you're trying to line up your shots, you will select the character that you want to be the focus, and you will orbit around to try and line up your shots. And sometimes that's what you want your camera to do, to seem to orbit around the character. So the way you would normally do that is set your camera to be at its starting point. Advance to the frame that will be your ending point. Here I'm going to choose frame 300 and adjust your camera's position accordingly, like so. Then what I normally do is set my transition curve to ease in and out. All right, that simulates a real-world camera that has actual mass and inertia. So instead of moving straight across in a linear fashion, it will start from 0, accelerate to its top speed, and then decelerate back to 0 at the end. But here is the problem. When I play, the camera simply goes in a straight line from its starting place to its ending place. Now, that is a wonderful shot for some things, and in another circumstance, I may not mind that shot, but that's not what I want. So let's see how we can go about correcting that. Fortunately, iClone has a built-in solution for this kind of problem. It's over here on the camera's Modify page. Just click this Smooth Camera Movement button. And when you play again, the computer program iClone recognizes that you wish to do an orbit instead of going straight across, and will adjust accordingly. Now, that may be sufficient for your purposes, but what happens if instead we want our camera to move a little further along the arc? And I'm going to set my transition curve one more time. Here's the problem if you're doing more than a half circle of arc. iClone does not realize that you want it to go all the way around the circle from Kane's 3 o'clock to about his 7 by way of noon, I suppose you'd call it. Instead, it goes the shortest distance it needs to between the keyframes that you have set. Now, how do we go about correcting that? Well, one of the things you can try doing is going to a point midway and adjusting your camera to about the halfway point, like so. But here is the problem with that. When I press play again, you'll notice about halfway through, the camera seemed to stop and then it seemed to start up again. And I can change my transition curves, make my first one an ease in, and make my second one an ease out. And it improves it slightly, but there's still just a little bit of a jump to it. What we want is for it to appear to be one seamless motion. And the way we do that is with a path. So the first thing I'm going to do is reset all the animation. So we simply have our original scene. I'm going to get rid of, well, I'll keep the smooth camera movement, I think. All right, so let's add a path. That's found under the Animation tab. And you will see that iClone has a built-in circle path as a default. And there's the path around Kane. Now what I'm going to do is switch the view to my preview camera, which I previously set up so that you can see here's Kane, here's the path that we have just created, and over here is the camera that we are now trying to loop around. I'm going to select the path and increase its size like so. Now let me set its Z size back down to 100 so that it is about where we want it to be, height-wise. All right. Now I can go over and select my camera, and in the camera's modify panel again, there is a section called Path, where it asks you to pick the path. Just click on any of the control points of the path, and the camera will be placed on it. Now right here, the camera is on position 75, which just happened to be the one closest to me. I want to set that to 0. Now you can see the 0 is actually over here on the right side of the screen. So what I'm going to do is select this path and rotate it until the camera is about where I had it before. And I can go back to my camera view and see that it's more or less the same place I wanted it. All right, so there is my camera on its path. I go back to the camera. I go back to frame 300, and I'm going to move this counter, the position on the path. Well, let's just set it for 60. And there you see the camera has moved 60% of the way around the path. All right. Now, you will notice, in fact, I'm going to click on the camera and zoom out just a bit. You'll notice the camera has not changed its orientation at all. It still points in the same direction. And of course, when we run our animation, it gets boring very quickly. That's not what we want. So one of the things we do is ask the camera to always keep Kane in the viewfinder. So we're going to come over here to the camera's modify panel once again and come over to where it says look at, pick the target, and click on Kane. Kane is now the target no matter what. And as we loop around, he will always be in place. Now, that satisfies our problem, but now we're left with another problem. This is a very boring composition. We've got our action happening right in the middle of the screen. As any cinematographer will tell you, that's not necessarily the best place to indicate tension and drama in a scene. You want your action to be off-center. And the way we're going to take care of that is by adding in a dummy. So let's add in a quick dummy. The way you add a dummy is to head over to your props and add just any simple 3D block that you want. I generally like to use a ball. Now, I don't need a ball as big as the one that I've got here. I'm going to set its pivot for the middle of the ball, and that will be the target that we're going to be looking at, and I'm going to set it to about 20% of its regular size. So there is our pivot, our dummy. And I'm going to adjust the location of that dummy so it's slightly offset. I'm going to come back to my preview camera and I'm going to move the dummy away from the origin. Now when I go back to my camera, instead of it being Kane's spine, I'm going to pick a target and have it be the dummy. All right? Now one of the things you also have to remember that I almost forgot is that when you have a dummy, make sure you label it as such, and I'm going to call this one Camera Look Dummy. All right? And in the dummy's modify page, make sure you click Set as Dummy. You will know it is set as a dummy because its bounding box turns from yellow to red. You'll notice when it's not a dummy, the bounding box is yellow. Set as a dummy, it is red. You can still see it while you are animating, but it will not render in your final product. And now you can see the camera is looking at the dummy, not at Kane. And therefore, Kane is a little bit off center. It adds a lot more dynamism to the scene. And when I have my scene move, there we have it. The best part about this as well is that I can animate the dummy so that as the scene progresses, I could make the dummy, whoops, not quite that high, go up just a little bit, and then come back down just a little bit. And the camera will continue to follow the dummy. The camera will always look at the dummy no matter where it is on the path. All right, so that's pretty simple if you want your camera to follow just a basic circular path or one of the pre-installed paths that iClone comes with. But what if you want to do more of a Steadicam work? Let's discuss how we can do that. All right, I've opened up a new scene in iClone. This is a set that I created specifically for this tutorial. It's parts of a house. And as you can see, I've got Trey here in the living room watching TV, Violet sitting at a table in the dining room, and down the hall to the bedroom is Gwen taking a nap on the bed. Now what we're going to try and do is get a camera that floats through the house in one smooth, continuous motion, looking at all of these characters. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a camera. Then I'm going to switch back to my preview camera view and select my camera in the Scene Manager. Selecting it in the Scene Manager will not change the view to that camera, but it will allow me to manipulate where that camera is. I'm going to go over to the camera's Transform panel and place it at the origin. Or actually, I'm going to place it about 1 meter above the origin. Like so. All right. Now I can look at the camera in my preview, using my preview camera. All right. So here is my camera. Now I'm going to add 2 dummies. Oops. And there we go. Now, by hitting the Move button and holding down the Control key, I can create a duplicate of this. So now I have 2 spheres. And I'm going to make sure that I have set them both as a dummy, like so. This sphere I'm going to move out of the way. All right, now these 2 dummies are going to serve 2 different purposes. And I'm going to make sure that I label them properly so I don't forget. This second dummy, I'm going to call the Camera Look Dummy, just like I did in our previous experiment with Kane. The first dummy is going to be the Path Dummy. This is the dummy we're going to use to create the path that the camera will follow. Now, let's start with the Path Dummy first. I'm going to come over to the Path Dummies Modify panel, scroll down to the Link section. In the Scene Manager, I'm going to scroll down to the Camera section and make sure that I can reach the camera. I have a lot of props and extra things here in my set, and I don't want to accidentally link the dummy to the wrong thing. So I'm going to link it to the camera, like so. And you can see it says it's linked to the camera. If I now go and select my camera and move my camera around, the link dummy, the path dummy comes with it. All right, that was easy enough. Now I'm going to select my Camera Look dummy. Or actually, I don't need to select that. I can select my camera, and then in the Camera's Modify plane, I can scroll down to Look At, pick the target, and set it for the Camera Look dummy. And you can see the camera has moved down so that it is pointing at the Camera Look dummy. And if I were to switch to that camera view, there's the dummy right there in the middle. All right, so now we have these set up where we need them to be. Let's move everything into place for our first shot. All right, I have moved my camera and the 2 dummies into their starting positions for the first shot of this Steadicam shot. I've also opened up iClone's picture-in-picture preview window so that even though I'm working in my main window using my preview camera, I have a shot showing what my final camera will look like. what the final shot will look like. And that way I can make sure that my camera is both in the right spot and looking in the right spot. I've also opened up my timeline with separate tracks for the camera look dummy, the camera, and the path dummy. All right, so now I've got keyframes already set up for the first shot. I am going to move to frame 5 and set everything up for my next shot. At this point, the timing does not matter. You could actually move one frame at a time if you wanted and get everything set up. What we're doing is getting a series of keyframes together to form our path. So our first thing is going to be taking the camera look dummy and moving it until the shot is what we want it to be. And I think that is probably going to be pretty good right there. All right, and as you can see, it's already set up a keyframe for us there. The transition curve is linear. Again, that does not matter at this point. All we are doing is getting keyframes that show relative positions of items. All right, so now let's set up our next shot. At frame 10, I am going to move the camera. Now notice as I move the camera, it will always keep, there we go, I think that's about what I want. It will always keep that camera dummy in the center of the screen. So as long as I move that dummy so that it is in the scene at an appropriate spot, I will still have some dynamics in the scene. Now, as you can see, the camera has moved out of the set, and we are getting a little piece of window here that we don't necessarily want. So what we're going to do is switch over to our camera view, like so. Scroll up to the clipping planes area and increase the planes that get clipped. Like so, until that window has disappeared. All right, now that our scene is set up the way we want it to be, we're going to come down here. Our camera is in the correct spot. We're going to go down to the path dummy and create a keyframe for the path dummy. All right, so now we have our second high point already lined up. Let's start with our third. We're going to go over to frame 15 and select our camera look dummy. And I'm going to switch back to our preview camera. What we're going to do is move our camera look dummy towards the dining room. Like so. All right. So that will be our next high point. The camera's going to move just a bit. Now we're going to select our camera. Let's make sure that we can get to it. And move our camera. Until it gets a shot that we want it to have. Let's say right about here. I think that's good enough for now. And again, we're going to scroll down and make sure that we mark a keyframe for the path dummy. All right, I am going to step through and mark the high points in this Steadicam shot that I want, and then we'll be back to show you how to turn it into a path. All right, I have gone through and hit all the high points in my Steadicam shot, showing all the places where my camera will be and all the places where my camera will look. And I've got a bunch of keyframes ready to go. Now what I'm going to do is convert all of these keyframes into paths. The way you do that is by highlighting the keyframes and right-clicking on any of the keyframes. And it says convert position to path, so that's what I'm going to do. All right, so you can see we've got a nice turquoise or teal, some kind of color path showing where the camera look dummy is going. I'm going to quickly label that as the look path. I'm going to scroll down and do the same thing with my path dummy. All right, and that one has come up rather a similar color. I don't know that I necessarily want that, so I'm going to click and change it to something different, a bright yellow. There we go. So now we can see our paths, and we're going to call this the camera path. All right. The next thing we're going to do is delete all of our keyframes except for the first one. I'm going to make sure that I have set my timeline back to 0. I'm going to go to my camera look dummy, and we're going to add it to a path, and it looks like it's going to be that teal path. So I click Pick Path, and I click anywhere on the path, and it will automatically move to that point. Then I need to go back and set it back to position 0. I'm going to do the same thing with my path dummy, but first I need to unlink it from the camera. And this is going to be hooked up to the yellow path. And then finally, I'm going to go back to my camera and link it to my path dummy. Now, as the path dummy moves, the camera will follow it rather than the other way around. All of these things are set up to go. Let's give it a good 20 seconds, so up to maybe frame 1200 or so. Close enough. And let's move the path dummy to position 100. And the camera look dummy to position 100 as well. Now comes the tricky part. Each of these dummies is now on a path, and it can go from 0 to 100 on the path. The trick is lining up the movement of the dummies along their respective paths so that the shots that we want come through. So here's the way we do it. Let's say, for example, that we want this scene, in fact, I'm going to get rid of this picture-in-picture since we no longer need it, that we want this scene to stay for 5 seconds. And that's going to be 300 frames. So we'll go to frame 300. And set our dummies back to 0. Okay. Now we want 3 seconds where our look dummy is going to go over to show Trey on the couch. That's 90 frames in iClone. So we're going to set this up to frame 390, like so. Now our path dummy, which controls where our camera moves, has not moved at all. So we're going to set that back to 0. And it looks like our camera dummy may be right where we want it to be. But we can go over here to the path section and adjust its position accordingly. I think that's probably where we want it to be. And just like you can in the transform section, you can change the transition type to ease in and out. So, going back to where the motion begins, like so. Oops. By stepping through your paths and tweaking ever so gently each time, you can get a nice, seamless Steadicam motion. And finally, if need be, if you find that the paths that iClone has generated for you don't quite work for you, you can always edit the paths. Let me zoom in a bit here so you can see where the paths are. Choose the path that you wish to edit, and you'll see an edit path. Click on that and you'll be able to edit the path. Now along each path you'll notice these little things that look like little balls with cones on them. These are the various control points of the path. Click on any of those control points and you'll be able to adjust it up or down as you wish. You can also add a control point by right-clicking wherever you wish to place it. iClone will then adjust your path accordingly. And then when the paths are to your liking and everything follows along, it should work out pretty well for you. One last thing to know about for your realistic camera work in iClone is the depth of field. So one of the things that we're going to do, I've reset all the animation in the project, and we're going to get rid of these dummies . And we're going to get rid of the paths. We don't need them anymore. Now our camera, we do need. Let's put that it's a little too far afield. Let's bring it back. Bring it back. Good. And let's rotate it so that it is facing, I think instead of using the gizmo, I'm going to rotate it like so. Whoops, nope, wrong way. There we go. Now we are back where we want to be, and I'm going to move it in like so. All right, let's switch over to the camera view, and I'm going to adjust the view like this. All right, now, right now it's in quick shading mode, and you can see Trey is in focus and Violet is in focus. This is not how cameras work. So we're going to work with our depth of field. First, I'm going to switch over to pixel shading mode. Depth of field will not show up in quick shading mode. It will only show up in pixel shading mode. Alright, so in pixel shading mode, you can see that Trey is completely in focus and Violet is also completely in focus. Normal cameras don't work that way. They are able to focus on pretty much one thing at a time, and anything that's not in the proper range is going to be blurred and out of focus. And iClone gives you an excellent way to simulate that. So let's go over to our camera and scroll up. Oh, actually, I was right there, to the depth of field, and we'll turn it on. And you see everything is kind of fuzzed out just a bit, except for a point that's about 750 units away with a range of 100 units. Now, if we click on this show range and then switch to the preview camera mode, and scroll out just a bit, you'll be able to see a rectangle. Two red rectangles. One border here, one border here. Those show you the range of your depth of field. Anything between these rectangles is going to be in focus. Anything outside is going to be not in focus. So if we want to bring Trey in focus first, let's try shrinking the range of those rectangles. Now by zooming in, we can see that Trey is now within the range of the rectangles. And so if we switch over to our camera view, we can see he is in focus and Violet is not. We can set a keyframe for our depth of field right here as we want to. Let's go over to 120 and start a new keyframe, and then say, over the space of another second or so, we want to change the depth of field from Trey to Violet. We can set up a new keyframe, change this back to 750 where it was, and now Violet is in focus while Trey is not. And presto. Now the preview window depth of field is not as high quality as the blur that you will see in your final render, so don't be scared of it. But that's how you can make your camera look like a real-life camera in iClone. All right, and that's it. Thanks very much for watching. I hope this helps. If you want to make your films look like a more realistic camera. Thanks to Ricky Grove and the entire Machinima Expo crew for this opportunity. I hope you enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of the expo and have a good day.